What's up, everybody? Today we're in the brand new Chevy C8. I know I'm a little late getting this video out, but hey, better late than never. So, for those who don't know, the C8 is the very first mid-engine Corvette. Introduced in 2020, it has the 6.2 liter V8 over my right shoulder, producing 490, 495 horsepower, depending on who you talk to. Starting at a little under $60,000, but realistically, you're looking at 70 to 90 with options, and currently new cars are trading at over 100,000 because of the dealer markups, and used cars are selling at about MSRP. Other things to note, we have a flappy paddle gearbox with 8 speeds. There is no manual option on offer yet. I honestly don't think there will be one, and frankly, as I'm about to show you, going through these twisty roads in a minute, I don't think you really need it. With that, I think that's all we need to talk about right here. So let's just jump out onto this twisty road and see why you don't really need that automatic or manual transmission. Well, first things first, this car is fast. You know, I've driven a lot of Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and everything, and this car will keep up with them no problem. But what's really impressive is how it takes the corners. Coming through this thing, you know, you've seen me drive the M3, the M5, the i8, and all sorts of different cars through here. But honestly, I think I have a new king. Yes, the M3 was a little more fun because it's a little more sharp and feels more connected. But this thing is just so goddamn planted that I can't even talk very well right now because it's just so fast. When I saw this car won Performance Car of the Year and took Doug DeMuro's Car of the Year, I knew I was in for something good, but I did not expect it to be this good through the corners. It genuinely feels as planted as some of the $200,000, $300,000 sports cars I've driven. The suspension is a bit rough on normal roads, but it still does ride decently, and it controls its body so well. You know, going through these corners, I'm not getting any feeling of body roll at all. And honestly, I'm trying to keep it a little slower on the way down because I did pass a few cyclists on the way up. But this car is just goading me. It's begging me to push it harder. In the past, Corvettes, you know, they were straight line muscle cars like everything else that we build here in America. But this just feels different. This feels happiest when I'm slinging it through corners like this. You know, I've got the little performance gauges here on the center console right now, or excuse me, on the gauge cluster. And I can see I'm pulling 0.72 G through that corner. And if you told me you could pull a corner like that in a Corvette 2-3 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you. It is just mind-boggling how good it is through these corners. So what I'm going to do now is I'll try to catch my breath a minute, pull off here, move some cameras around, and we will do a little more sedate and normal driving. So as we're getting back onto some more normal driving roads where I'm not going quite as spiritedly as I was, we can talk a little bit more about the Corvette just as a normal car. And honestly, driving it around for the past 50, 60 miles that I've put on it already, it's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. The materials, well, right now the car is a year old and they feel decent. You know, this one has 8,800 miles on it. And the materials, they don't feel cheap, like super cheap or excessively cheap like we've seen from GM in the past. The actual quality is surprising coming from GM and their sort of questionable history with cost cutting in the past. Also, an interesting thing to note is this car does have cylinder deactivation. So right now on the dash, it's switching between a little white V8 icon and a green V4 icon that lets me know if the engine has shut off half of its cylinders and if we're just cruising on the smaller displacement in order to save on fuel. Like I said, up in the hills, the suspension is excellent for performance driving, less so for normal day-to-day driving. It is a little harsh, but the reality is with this kind of performance, it's one of those things that you're going to forgive if you're looking at a car like this. Because if you're looking at daily driving a car like a Corvette, you know, you're the sort of person who's going to be more than willing to put up with a rough ride for how well it drives. And if you're not daily driving it and you're just using it on a weekend car, who cares if it rides a little rough? It does what it needs to do very well. One sporting thing I genuinely do not like, I've gotten a little more used to it, but it's this square steering wheel. Up on the hills, it's excellent, but when you're just trying to maneuver it around a parking lot or just in a normal situation, it is a little funky, it's a little wonky. You do get used to it to an extent, but it's just odd. And you know, again, it's one of those things that if you're looking at one of these cars, you're not going to care about that. It's not the sort of thing that's going to dissuade anyone. One thing I will have to say about this car, in the time that I've had it, I've never once been able to get the infotainment system to work properly. I haven't heard of this in other cars, so it could very well just be an issue with this particular example. But the screen keeps power cycling, I guess would be the best way to describe it. You know, I tried to use CarPlay, it froze up, the radio stayed on after I turned off the car, got out and locked it. Then I finally got it to stop doing that, and I tried Bluetooth, and I'm like, okay, maybe it's my phone and my cable that are screwing with it. No, it started freezing up and power cycling after I did that. I got the radio to work for a few minutes yesterday, but today it's just gone again. And this car was recently in for a service after a check engine light came on, so I do wonder if it might just be something to have to do with what the dealer did, and they just sort of forgot to change something or reset factory settings. But it is a little annoying to see in a car this new, and it is something to be aware of as a potential happening. But again, like I said, I looked around online to see if there were fixes or there was some way to power cycle it manually myself, and nobody seemed to have any information on that online. Nobody seemed to be reporting a similar issue, so like I said, it could very well just be an issue with this particular car. Now, of course, one of the big things that everybody's talking about with the C8 is the fact that it's mid-engine. Now, from a performance standpoint, it's absolutely phenomenal. I cannot imagine another Corvette from prior years, except for perhaps the last generation ZR1, going through those corners the way this thing did. You know, with the aerodynamics and everything, that ZR1 can be very well planted, but the reality is having the engine between the axles and behind the passenger compartment, it is just such a better layout in terms of performance. And frankly, with how good the last ZR1 and the last Z06 models were, there wasn't really anywhere left that they could go with a front engine car, especially considering that you're limited on power now because of emissions regulations, turbocharging, blah, 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 blah. There will be purists talking about how, oh, it's a Corvette, it's mid-engine, it shouldn't be doing that, blah, blah. Well, to those people, I would like to give a gentle reminder that Zora Duntov, who Corvette people will know is considered the godfather of the Corvette, he was a GM bigwig back in the day. His intention with the Corvette was always to put the engine in the middle, even back in the 50s and 60s. So, to all those purists who are saying it's not a real Corvette anymore, this is what the designer and the godfather of this car wanted. If you're really complaining about that, do you really know your Corvettes as well as you say you do? A little food for thought there. Now, another thing that's being raised is this car a supercar now? I mean, let's go through the checklist. It's mid-engined, it looks really good, and it's incredibly fast. However, I don't think it's a supercar. I don't think that's fair to say. For a supercar to be a supercar, it has to have that special X factor. And this car will definitely put a smile on your face, but it's still with the exception of the current market situation with the orders, I'm hearing as far out as 2022 or 2023 if you were to go to your dealer and try to spec your own today. With orders that far out and the market the way it is, cars with a few thousand miles selling at sticker, cars with no miles selling well over sticker, they're not quite the everyman car that Corvettes have sort of been in the past, where it was something that anybody could really attain just by working hard. Whereas, the Ferraris, the Lamborghinis, and all those, they're always sort of that unobtainium unless you are one of those lucky few. The Corvette has always been one of those cars that you could achieve as just a working stiff here in America. And it doesn't quite have that right now because of that market problem that we were talking about. But in general, this car starts at just under 60. And like I said, with some options, you're going to be 70, 80. It's not cheap by any measure, but compared to other cars that perform this well, have these looks, it is a massive, massive bargain. And on top of that, it's an LT engine in the back, not an Italian V12 or a twin turbocharged British V8. The parts are easily available to just about any Chevy dealer here in America. And aside from the screen wonkiness and whatever the check engine light was, these cars are gonna be pretty reliable because it's a tried and true motor. I'm certain these things are gonna be building a ton of power as more and more tuners get their hands on them. These things are gonna be incredible, just rocket ships when they get built. And even when they depreciate in a few years, because they will, they're gonna build plenty of them once the COVID restrictions are over and they can open the factories up again to proper capacity. They'll start cranking these things out, and they'll start to become affordable second-hand cars in a few years. Because, all the guys that rushed out to buy these C8s when they came out in 2020, they're all going to be the same guys that are lining up to get the Z06s and the ZR1s, and they're going to trade them in. So we'll have a nice little surplus of these coming into the market, depreciating the second-hand value. And I wager a significant portion of my life savings that these things are going to flood the market, and there's going to be a lot of guys out there, and gals, going out there and buying these as their weekend track weapons, because they are phenomenal for that. We're coming up near where I usually end these drive reviews, so I think there are a few little things to cover, because I've talked a lot about market position, about the history, well, not so much the history, but the mid-engine aspect and addressing those criticisms. There are a few more things that I should mention. First one is that these brakes are incredible. They stop so hard and so fast. Now, there's also the question of this flappy paddle gearbox, and as I mentioned earlier, this car, you couldn't really exploit it to its fullest with a manual, as much fun as a manual transmission is. With this paddle shift gearbox, I will say in automatic mode and comfort mode, I had it on cruise control coming up on the freeway last night, and for some reason it just seemed to shift at weird places, and it didn't quite make up its mind. But when I've thrown it into manual mode and just taken over myself, it's quick, it's responsive, and another nice thing that it does is it won't let you under rev or over rev the motor. If you're trying to upshift at too low of an RPM, it won't give you the gear. If you're trying to downshift at too high an RPM, it won't give you the gear. The other thing I noticed that was a little dim-witted was the cylinder deactivation. I've seen it come on a couple of times while we were talking here, and it came on a few times on the freeway, but I had the cruise control set to highway speeds, and it was kind of odd the way it would sort of jump on and off as we went, but at least it has it, and it makes a token effort. I can jump here on the trip computer and see average fuel economy has been 17.5 mpg, and the last 50 miles of my driving has been 16.6, so it's better than it could be, but it's not a hybrid, it's not a plug-in, it's none of that stuff. It's Corvette. Deal with it. Now, as I'm pulling up, I guess the last point really to cover with this car is, does it deserve the hype? I think it is an excellent car, aside from this little issue that I've had with the center screen. And I think that especially as they come down in value, as the supply is able to meet the demand, I think they will become an excellent value for money. Would I spend my money on it? I don't think so, only because I'm the type of person who would be more willing to spend $70,000, $80,000 on a pre-owned Italian car and be willing to take that risk, because that's just what I grew up loving. But if you're the sort of person who is wanting that supercar performance and wanting that an incredible driving experience, but you're nervous about the reliability issues and the maintenance issues of jumping into a sports car like that, this is absolutely going to give you a very similar experience. Honestly, driving it, I'm just as impressed with it as I have been with some of those high dollar cars in the past. Every American loves a Corvette, but I was never one of those guys that was, had Corvettes up on my wall. But that's not the car's fault, that's a my fault thing. So I do think that anybody who is lusting after a Corvette and wants to see the Corvette perform incredibly is going to be very, very happy with this car. Thank you for watching. As always, I do have links below to my articles. Please do like, comment, subscribe, all that other BS to see what we have next, because hopefully it's something British and with a few more cylinders. So that should be very fun to take a look at. Take care, and we'll see you next time.